Ignite speaker, and that is Casey Schulberg, who is right here with his lovely pup, Heavenly. And Casey is the film director for the film that we're about to watch. He's an entrepreneur and climate change activist with a 30-year career in film and television, and has produced and directed 4 documentaries on water quality and climate change, spent 5 years with the International Waterkeeper Alliance, working with the climate change cohort and covering UN climate conferences. So really steeped in this subject matter. And currently partnering with the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma to develop a sustainable resort. So that's just, you know, a couple things Casey's up to, not a busy man at all. We're so proud to have him here and to join us and to kick off the screening with an Ignite talk. So y'all give it up for Casey.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here with you, and we're filming this, and there's some people tuning in from points around the globe. So my first time in Montana, quite a revelation, so really happy to be here. Bex, thank you to Anderson for putting this together and inviting us. So as Bex said, I'm an entrepreneur and a climate change activist or environmental activist and filmmaker. And yeah, we put together a little doc that you'll see here, and then I have a really celebrated panel that's going to come, and we'll talk for half an hour when the movie's done. So why are we in this pickle? Let me just see here. In 2015, the Paris Climate Accord basically asked us to limit, or tried to set out a directive to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, above in pre-industrial levels by the year 2050. And by many accounts, we've attained that now. Last year, as you can see by these headlines, a lot of people think that we're already hitting that 1.5 degree marker. It depends where you are in the country or in the world. The poles are warming faster than some other parts. That's creating a whole host of problems in itself because we're melting a lot of ice. And you have all these kind of cyclical behaviors, like you melt ice, this reveals more permafrost, that reflects less sun, so it gets hotter, and all these kind of, you know, cycles that are just not helpful. But you can see by what we're currently going through, and there was some talk that I had a hand in creating the event in Florida yesterday. I don't have that kind of power. But it is kind of remarkable that Florida has become a poster child in a lot of ways for climate change, what with flooding, extreme precipitation, hurricanes, sea level rise. So, and I lived in Florida for 10 years. That's when I made this documentary about a year ago on the impacts of climate change on Southwest Florida that you're going to see in a minute. So we're basically in a pickle here, folks, because we're basically at 1.5 degrees now, and they were trying to hold that, get it curved down below that, and it looks like we've attained that, and we may blow through that. So that would be we'll see a host of implications and you know, horrific events that'll be compounded if we blow through the 1.5 degrees. So. By all accounts, the hottest year on record was last year, 2023. And you can see that actually 2023 was excessively higher than the prior year. So it was far and away the hottest year on record. So we're heading toward something which is really undesirable. And how do we deal with this? How do we bend the curve? That's the question. And we'll try to get into that with our panelists after the movie. So part of the problem is when we have this warming of the universe, warming of the planet, 90% of that warming goes into the ocean. So you can see the very tiny sliver of yellow is the land. In other words, land absorbs heat, but not to the rate that water does. So look at all that blue stuff. That's the water. That's all heating oceans. So it's very hard to cool down the oceans when they've been heated. So that, you know, Harold Wanless, Director Emeritus of the University of Miami School of Geology says basically you can't stop. Even if we stopped everything now, we would still see a progression toward more warming because a lot of this is just in motion. You can't, it's like a friend of mine said, you drop a ball, and even if you stop dropping the ball, that ball is already in motion, it's gonna hit the floor. So a lot of this stuff is baked in, and we're gonna see the implications grow and continue to grow for 30 to 40 years, and that is dependent on whether we can actually bend this curve and start to get this thing under control, which is not a done deal. It's definitely an open question. So, the impacts of having all that warm water are manifold. Basically, what evaporates when we have warm water? Water goes into the atmosphere and it accumulates, and then we have extreme precipitation. So that's what we're seeing, and we're seeing it also. Warm water creates an environment that is positive for extreme hurricanes to gather steam. So we saw the one yesterday go from a tropical storm to Cat 4 within 8 to 10 hours. That's because the water in the Gulf of Mexico is around 80 degrees. It should be around 60 at this time of year. It's around 80. We clocked temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico at 95 degrees last summer. So that's really propitious for huge and voluminous storms, and then all that is just going to dump tons of water on our land, and that's part of the reason why we see what we saw yesterday. So it's kind of why what we're talking about is important and timely, because Florida just went through another horrific event yesterday, and we have somebody chiming in after the movie from Southwest Florida. They're going to call in from Fort Myers. That's Mike Savarese that you'll see in this movie, who's a climate change scientist. And he's actually going to be able to call in, even though they got devastated yesterday, and talk about what's going on locally. So that's where we are. Really thank you for inviting us. We'll cue the movie now, and we'll come back to you in a few. Bex will introduce these panelists, and we'll get back into it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for offering your film. Did y'all enjoy watching it? I mean, enjoy is not the right word, I think, right? We're all like pretty disturbed by what we're witnessing. And we're gonna get a little more insight from these amazing panelists. So I wanna start, Dr. Lise Van Susteren, which you had started to speak to, is a general and forensic psychiatrist in Washington, D.C., and an expert on the physical and psychological impacts of climate change. She is a clinical associate professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at George Washington University and has been a consultant to the executive branch of the U.S. government, profiling world leaders. She's a frequent contributor on television, radio, and in the print media. Her book, Emotional Inflammation: Discover Your Triggers and Reclaim Your Equilibrium During Anxious Times, was published in April 2020. So we have Dr. Lise Van Susteren with us soon, virtually. Chris Wilke will also be joining us virtually. He is a global climate strategist and seasoned NGO professional specializing in climate and water protection, environmental advocacy, leadership, and fundraising. With a rich background that includes recent roles as Global Advocacy Manager at Waterkeeper Alliance and Executive Director of Puget Soundkeeper Alliance, Chris brings a wealth of experience in building local, national, and international coalitions, programs, and funding to drive impactful environmental outcomes at all levels. And then finally, our third panelist is Dr. Michael Savarese, a distinguished professor of coastal geology, climate resilience, and preparation within the Department of Marine and Earth Sciences at Florida Gulf Coast University's Water School. And of course, we saw Dr. Savarese in the film. He has served as a community liaison to foster coastal resilience and climate change preparedness efforts throughout Southwest Florida and beyond, working closely with natural, urban, and cultural resource managers and elected officials within local, state, and federal government. So do we want to, let's pull up our folks so we can make sure we call out everybody. And actually, I'll hand it over to our director, Casey, to lead us through the panel.
Thank you. So we're going to start with Lise. Do we have Lise?
Tell me specifically, or I'll go off on a riff that you won't be happy about. What specific question do you want me to address right now? Is it the kids and what they're going through right now, the future, the storm today? Tell me exactly what you want to know so I don't go off on a bender.
Well, any of your benders would be illuminating, Lise. So you have kind of carte blanche. But let's just look at children. Let's look at what children, how it's going to damage children going forward the next decade.
It is extremely damaging, and probably the easiest way to summarize this is for people to recognize that there is something called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and we know that extreme weather events qualify as adverse childhood experiences, and we also know that the more traumas affect children, the more likely they are to suffer from adverse childhood experiences, and studies show that they are more likely to die young and to suffer from chronic illness as a result of ACEs. So we have a threat that not only exists today, but one that extends into the future. And in addition, there are two other things that I'd like to point out. One is the enormous impact of fearing the future when you are a young person and you have many more years to live. I dubbed it pre-traumatic stress. I thought I coined it, but turns out the Danish army did. But there's pre-traumatic stress where all of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress are experienced, but before some of these events even happen. And then the second thing is, I've done surveys now, initially a global survey of 10,000 young people. Now coming out mid-October from the Lancet is a study of 16,000 people. And in general, what we know, not specifically addressing these, the second study, but the first one, and what I know of the way the mind works, is that our children are increasingly, in the first study, that by a factor, it was like 2/3 of the kids lay the blame of climate change firmly at the feet of government. And so when trust in government is eroded, that is when our form of government is under threat. And we need to remember that democracy is not a default form of government. It requires an involved citizenry. So that's my first short riff. You told me to say what was on my mind.
Thank you, Lise. We're going to open it up to questions in a minute, and that's really helpful. So our next panelist is Chris Wilke. And Chris is one of the most strategic climate change activists that I know and informed, and he did yeoman work keeping oil and gas drilling off the coast of the Bahamas, and he's been working, I pitched in a little bit on trying to keep oil and gas drilling from Senegal, from the coast of Senegal. And Chris was 5 years, longer than that, the Global Advocacy Manager for the Waterkeeper Alliance. I was in the Waterkeeper Alliance for 5 years as well, so we were colleagues. All these people are not only colleagues, they're friends. So Chris, weigh in on what you think are the top line objectives or concerns as you see it on the war against climate change.
Well, thank you, Casey. It's so great to be here with you and all the other panelists, and congrats on your film. And it's, seeing the impacts of the hurricane just in the last 24 hours, it just reminds us of everything that's at stake. I guess the 3 points that I kind of wanted to cover as I was thinking about this panel today. The first one, the foremost one, just get it out of the way right away, is we have to keep working on stopping the sources of climate change, even as we adapt, even as we struggle with the impacts. There is no point at which we just pivot to focusing on impacts and forget stopping preventing it, because it will keep getting worse. That is a universal aphorism, I believe, is stuff can always get worse than it is. And the key point that we have to remember, there are many sources of climate change. There are many things that we can do that will minimize the impact on the planet, but fossil fuel extraction and the use of fossil fuels must decrease deeply, dramatically, and over a sustained period of time until we can come into the planetary balance, which is often referred to as net zero. The second point I want to make is that it gets to Lisa's point. The situation is very serious. It's terrifying, and it's traumatic to both experience the impacts of climate change and to think about what it means for the entire planet. But it actually could be worse. There's a lot of talk about triggering events for runaway climate change, and it's going to come out of our hands. There's a healthy debate going on about those subjects, but where I'm kind of coming in, I'm not a scientist, but the ones I'm following and paying attention to, it doesn't look like we are going to get to that point where we just lose control of this and it just runs away, at least not within the next several hundred years. And that's actually good news. It is, but the truth is bad enough. It can get worse. It can get a lot worse. We can trigger feedback loops and tipping points and things like that. So it can continue to get worse, but we never really lose our agency in being able to stop it, or at least mitigate it. And then the third point I wanted to make, just watching the politics, news, and everything, is that the pathway to coming into the planetary boundaries, to achieving net zero, where the Earth is absorbing as much carbon as it is emitting, including our own emissions, is very, very difficult. It involves a huge amount of systemic change. And one of the problems with that is there are forces that are actually working against us right now, that are putting out disinformation, that are actually undermining policies, that are putting democracy on the line in order to limit their any controls on the way they make money, which is by selling fossil fuels. And that's a real problem. And I don't know if we can solve this problem over the objections of so many people and over the rampant disinformation that we're facing. So that needs to be brought in line. And that needs to be given the light of day and shown in public for what it is, that it is actually a very cynical disinformation campaign, lies, if you will, to sow doubt and confuse people.
So, I mean, that's a huge problem. In fact, in my former home state of Florida, Governor DeSantis has excised any mention of climate change from all of the state records, so there's no mention of climate change, much the way Rick Scott did in the prior administration. And that's just not helpful. You know, that's burying your head in quicksand. And so we're up against that, in addition to, you know, to the real problems we're trying to tackle and trying to bring this in line. So speaking of the front lines, Dr. Savarese, who you just saw in the movie, is with us today. I wasn't sure he'd be able to make it because he's based in Fort Myers, and luckily he didn't get too swamped. So Mike, tell us what's going on, what you just saw happen, and what do you think the future of regions like Southwest Florida are? What's the prognosis for Southwest Florida?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Casey, and thanks everybody there at Project Winterland. It's good to be part of this conversation. Frankly, I wish I were with you and I were in Montana at this very moment. It's been a very PTSD kind of last few days since we just experienced Helene. Anyway, so Casey, you ask a really critical question that I think about literally every day, and that is just how sustainable is this situation? The prognosis, I would argue, is not very good. I guess what I'm focusing on here on the front lines here on the Gulf Coast of Florida is the one specific effect of climate change, and that is an increase in storminess. And when you increase storminess on top of sea level rise, you have this, more evil synergistic effect. Ian, I think what we've learned, and I guess this isn't new knowledge for a geoscientist that's interested in the coast, but once a coastline has been impacted and compromised in terms of its resiliency capacity, it's then left ever so more vulnerable as you move forward into the future. And Ian was one of those vulnerability makers, if you will. We took such serious damage during Ian that we were left, metaphorically speaking, with our pants down. And you know, we don't have the kind of natural protective features that we had before Ian. And that sort of triggering impactful event isn't unique to Southwest Florida. It has happened along all of Florida's coast, particularly on the Gulf Coast. And when you've got an extreme storm, I would call Helene an extreme storm to impact the Big Bend area. That's where it made landfall last night. That area had been made more vulnerable by other previous extreme storms like Hurricane Michael in years past. And the coast just doesn't have time to repair itself naturally, and it becomes too costly to repair itself artifactually through human intervention. And so if you look at us here after Ian in September of 2022, almost 2 years to the day, I guess tomorrow is the 2-year anniversary. Since Ian, we've had 3 storms that have caused severe inundation and overwash from storm surge. It was Hurricane Idalia in the fall of 23, Hurricane Debbie, which was at least here, and Idalia here were trivial storms. Debbie was in July of this year. And then of course Helene, which was just yesterday. And so to have to deal with, or to use Chris's thought, adapting to these kinds of more frequent iterative phenomena is just not sustainable. And not only are we feeling it with respect to damage and loss of life and people leaving in the area, the economic impacts are extreme. The impacts on the mortgage market, on homeowners insurance, they're all going to worsen and worsen. So, and then of course, to tie into Liza's comments, I mean, people are stressed and anxious, and you know, it's not a happy time. So, yeah. I'm not sure there was an answer in there for you, Casey. Hopefully there was.
No, that was very informative, Mike. Absolutely. So I don't know if anybody has a question. So we kind of covered really very briefly wellness and psychiatric implications of climate change, which is something that you don't normally, or like might not be your first thought about this, but it really needs to be taken into consideration. We talked about some strategic changes that we need to make, and obviously toning down, pulling back on oil and gas excavation. And then we talked about Mike on the front lines and what's going on in Southwest Florida. Does anybody have a question for any of our panelists? Yes, sir. Yeah, Rob.
What is the reduction in population in the Gulf Coast area?
What is the what?
Reduction in population based on this.
The reduction?
Yeah, he mentioned it. I wonder if there's stats on population.
Well, Mike may have some knowledge on that, but the population in Florida is not reducing. I mean, it may start to turn, because people will realize that some of these areas are just not sustainable. But for the moment, we're still growing by leaps and bounds. Mike, do you have any 411 on that?
Yeah, Casey, it might be helpful for you to repeat the question when it's
Oh,
asked,
yes, sure.
it's hard for us to hear,
So
but I think I got the gist of it.
Yeah, so Rob is asking if there's a reduction in population, I guess caused by climate change in Florida.
I don't have any hard facts and figures for you, but population is definitely still growing here. There's still lots of people coming in. I think maybe what's more interesting is sort of a redistribution of the population. In other words, people are leaving and other people are taking their place. We're also seeing this seemingly strange economic transition. Fort Myers Beach, a township which sits on a barrier island, after Ian, it had a lot of generational homes where people had been living there in cheaper, less resilient construction, if you will, and those people lost their homes, were unable to rebuild, and those properties have all been sold, and many of them are being purchased by Airbnb corporations. So the nature of our communities, the demographics of our communities are changing as a consequence. And just as an interesting sideline, Fort Myers Beach now is worried about not having enough kids to populate their elementary school because the population has shifted so much. So, I think somebody else had some thoughts about population change.
Somebody, Chris or Lise?
Thank you. I did one. I had one thought. Thank you. That's very helpful, Mike. And I would like to say that also I forgot my manners in thanking people for having me here as a climate activist. I tend to be jumping right in with both feet instead of saying thank you for all the work you've done here. And I love your motto, ideas are good, solutions are better. I took a picture of it. As far as the population is concerned, this was of great interest to me from a psychological perspective, and that is that Florida is still growing in population, as you said, Michael. But what I believe is happening is that people who recently moved there, thinking of this as the idyllic place to retire, have recognized the depth of the problems and that they are vulnerable. And I believe those are many of the people, the population at least, that is leaving.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the
Yeah,
change.
there's definitely
Go
there's
ahead.
definitely a lack of appreciation of the sensitive place for someone who retires in Florida. You know, if you're retiring, you know, Interstate 75 drives the current of retirement on the west coast of Florida, and I-95 drives what happens on the east coast. And the people that are driving down I-75 to move to Florida are just unaware of what hurricanes are all about. And so they come here kind of blind. And so you're right, I think there's just it's a quick learning curve, and you don't really learn until you get here.
Yeah, I mean, I sold my house about 1.5 years ago in Florida, and partly because I mean, I've been doing the research. I just knew that the housing market would crest one day, and basically driven by excessive mortgage, excessive insurance rates, and the market will drive the kind of redistribution of population, and people get the idea. And people, you know, I knew after Ian, and my house went through Ian. I suffered all right. It wasn't horrific, but I knew that I predicted there'd be another storm of that magnitude within 5 years. It ended up being within 2 years, and this is just going to continue. This is the track we're on. So, you know, it will drive changes in population, changes in where we and one thing I want to make is that environmental justice, and we touched on this a little bit in the documentary about how people who are disadvantaged are going to be less prepared to make changes or to adapt. And the other thing is, in our rush to renewable energies, we have to be very conscious of not raping native lands in our lithium mining. This is another invasion of native lands to take, you know, because we need lithium like crazy. So we have to go fast, but we have to go fast responsibly. And we have to check ourselves at every point and make sure that we're not taking advantage of less advantaged people, or we're just, you know, in our rush to seek answers, which we need to do. We don't have a whole lot of time. So, but let's do it in a responsible fashion. So, wondering if there are any other questions from the group here. Yes, sir.
Casey, you know, what we're listening to is Plan A. We got to mitigate climate issues, less use of fuels and things like that. You climate activists, us climate activists talk about this stuff, but it's all Plan A. It's clear Plan A ain't working. What's Plan B, and what does that look like?
So Tim is asking, the climate activists are working on Plan A, which is basically kind of addressing the problem. He's asking what Plan B is. What do you mean by Plan B, Tim?
But I don't see a Plan B. And if we've got crisis situation around the world, we've got climate activists and academics drawing attention to this, and nothing's happening, what do the smart people think is going to be a consequence of no action?
Well, it's not like there's no action. I mean, it's a bell curve, and we need to get people. Right now, we're just slowly kind of ramping up to some new solutions, and that's going to be basically driven by the technology sector. They're going to come up with some innovative ideas to try to overtake the rate at which we're kind of collapsing. So there may be some innovative solutions that we haven't really that we haven't seen yet. And so everybody has to be involved. I don't know that there's no plan B. I mean, there's people working in all kinds of sectors. There's people working in green technologies and green, innovative solutions. I know I live in Oklahoma now, and you can't say climate change in Oklahoma, but you can say sustainable and renewable, and that's okay. That's permitted. That's like parlance that is not driven off the playing field. So there's a lot of wind energy in Oklahoma. There's a lot of solar energy coming about. So we need kind of an all hands on deck effort, and it goes from us, what we can do in our daily lives, to voting in the right people who are going to be sensitive to this and kind of handle this responsibly, and then to federal governments and international governments. But I don't think it's quite fair to say there's nothing happening. I don't know. Do you have opinions about that, Chris or Mike or Lise?
Sure. As I kind of said earlier, I'll just say it again. Plan A never goes away. Plan A is the math that we are dealt with. And that is the central task to prevent things from getting worse, is to reduce carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases to the point where the Earth can absorb them at the same rate that we're putting them out. And that never goes away. We are now, if you consider Plan B to be adapting and disaster relief and loss of damage and all these other things in response to the impacts of climate change, we've now added Plan B, C, and D to Plan A, but Plan A has not gone away. It will stay there, and it will keep getting worse until we deal with Plan A. And so that is just as a fundamental fact that we have to deal with. I also think that the phrase, the use of fossil fuels and alternative energies and things like that, we need to really put this in perspective. If we are extracting fossil fuels at the same rate that we are today, it does not matter how much renewable energy we have. Just think about that for a second. If someone buys a new Tesla, or some government puts up a new wind farm, and fossil fuel extraction remains where it is, that carbon is coming out of the earth and into the atmosphere in one form or another. Maybe in plastic production, maybe in, even if the United States is actually lowering its carbon emissions. I don't know if everyone knows that, but we are actually going down a little bit. But last year we had a record year for fossil fuel exports. It's like sending your drug dealers to rehab to get clean so they can sell more drugs. That's what's happening. And also we are trying to summit a mountain soon. And one of these years we're going to reach peak oil production, which is at the point where the most amount of oil in history is being produced, and we're going to start declining. That will be a point for a minor celebration. This is like taking a snapshot on the photo on the summit of a mountain. You still have half the journey left, and that's climbing down the mountain, and the metaphor applies, I think, because many mountain climbers will tell you that's the most dangerous part of the journey, is climbing down the mountain. The day that we reach peak oil, we are at maximum CO2 emissions, more than we've ever emitted. We are doing more damage to the planet on the day we reach peak emissions, and we have all of the reduction still ahead of us. So we've got to keep oil in the ground, we've got to keep coal in the ground, we've got to keep methane gas, sometimes called natural gas, in the ground. And we need to accelerate the transition, yes, but we also need to reduce by just about 5% a year globally. Is a number that we need to do to keep things from getting completely out of hand. Sorry if I went too long.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. So I think we're going to get into the next element of the program today, so we kind of ran a little over. We got started a few minutes late. So I want to thank Lise, Dr. Lise Van Susteren. I want to thank Dr. Michael Savarese, and want to thank Chris Wilke for their participation today. Chris phoning in from Seattle, Lise from Washington, D.C., and Mike Savarese from Fort Myers, Florida. So thank you all for your interest, and we can continue to sprinkle the infield with more information about this. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. Enjoy your time.
All right, y'all give it up for Casey for organizing all of that. And your passion and